Hello? Oh, it is on. Excuse me. All right. Hey, welcome. All right, I'm just here to say hello, to kick this meeting off, to thank all of you who are interested in FORTE. We have pins that are going to become the fashion statement of the meeting. Rocky and I are arguing because I swear this little circle's brown. It is the colorectal trial. He said, no, it's red, it's just the light, but I'm telling you, this thing is brown. They call him FUBU. I don't know why. He says it's cuddly. Only Rocky thinks colorectal trials are cuddly, but okay. I mean, I love it all. We are so pleased to have this trial. It's such an important trial, 5 versus 10 years. It could save patients a lot of time, healthcare systems, and the financial impact would be huge. So we're really thrilled to have this trial. It is a large trial. You've heard a lot about it. I just mentioned it at the general session. Thanks to Dr. Russo, who gives me hives when she talks about, and you need 166 more per month to hit your September goal. So your team will talk a lot about that. I have to give grand applause to this research team. They are the exemplars among all NCORP trials on how hard they have worked to get the accrual where it needs to be. And you know that they have to engage GI docs who are not generally NCORP members. And they have made very cogent arguments about why we need extra screening, extra funding and incentives for accrual. And the NCI, DCP has been wonderful in working with us on that because this accrual is not our standard accrual. And what they're doing is working. Dr. Schoen has made a great argument about additional funding and incentives for mega accruers. So there's a great opportunity to get your numbers in and to get extra incentive for doing that. And we thank Interim DCP Director, Dr. Heckman Stoddard, for actually immediately seeing the value in this and approving that amendment that'll be coming forward. So I will now hand it over to our very capable team, and I again thank all of you for your interest in this trial.
That's right.
That's the right one.
No. The background music.
I don't need the background music. I have Jeff. Jeff hums as I go along.
I sing, yes.
All right, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's a very exciting meeting for us. We have our first in-person coordinator meeting following this workshop. As Deb said, we have been working very, very hard, and I'm really glad to update you all. I put this slide together on 2/9, so that's a week ago. We were at 12:05. We're now at 12:25, so we had 20 in the last week. It's not enough, but it shows that we are out there and we're fighting and we're doing things. Our recruitment goal as of September 30th, 2023 was 950. FORTE finished at 941, 99.1% of that goal. However, the recruitment goal is doubling in this coming year from 63 a month to 119 per month that we need to average beginning October 1. Clearly, in order to accomplish that, we need more centers and we need centers to perform at higher recruitment rates. What are our strategies? We are on a continuous quest to enroll new centers. You see, I said Yale, NYU, Stanford, Miami will be recruiting soon. Yale recruited its first patient yesterday. So that's another new site. We have made a very special initiative to get VA sites enrolling. There's always been a lot of, concept from NCI. We should have VA sites enrolling in NRG trials. That's not an easy thing to accomplish. We think FORTE could be the model for that. We have 5 VA sites that are currently enrolling. We have several more that are on the precipice. Incidentally, these are really accomplished sites. For example, between the 3 sites that I can think of off the top of my head, they recruited between 1,000 and 2,000 patients into the CONFIRM trial, which was a trial that randomized people to FIT, fecal immunochemical testing versus colonoscopy. So here's another colorectal trial for them, and if we can get them recruiting at a high level, that would be a real big plus. On February 8th, we had 3 centers enroll their first patients, Bay Pines VA, 2 VAs, and Oregon, and Bay Pines recruited another one yesterday. So we are doing everything we can. What are the recipes for success, or how to improve performance at your site? Incentives. Our IRB from the CRB has this statement, and this statement will remain in IRB for the eternity of this trial. You will not be paid to take part in this study. That is what's required language. However, and this is how things work in this world, we are okay to either use, initially it was called a travel allowance, because people would have to come into the center to get a blood draw. And so we said, well, could we pay people to do that? And the CRB said, fine. And so we have some sites that don't give any incentive. Our site, for example, gives $40. Many other sites give $40. We have one site that's giving $100. What was initially a travel allowance, they also now permit us to call it, quote, offset the cost of your inconvenience and time, because we're doing remote blood draw and remote consent, so there's no more travel, but still, we are permitted to do incentives. This is fully expected on the part of the CIRB. They didn't blink in this kind of thing. We also, for example, are giving incentives for the stool submission. At our site, we give $25. Again, one site is up to $100 for that. Our site has a compliance rate with the stool specimen of 90%. That's the highest in the trial. In general, the trial overall is around 70%. So yes, an incentive like that could stimulate compliance, but also, of course, it's part of the overall incentive to participate in the trial, and that is a plus since we need to get people in. I wanted to speak a little about remote consent and blood draw. Kaiser, which is the #1 recruiting site, and UPMC, which is the second highest recruiting site, both of them employ remote consent and blood draw. This means consent can be obtained either over the phone or by Zoom, and the participant sends their signed consent either by photo scan or by snail mail. We also have REDCap. Kaiser uses REDCap, and we are about to use REDCap or are very close to it. And in REDCap, you can sign consent on your iPhone, and your consent, signed consent comes back to you automatically, so you have the consent returned to the participant. We also have pioneered remote blood draw. We have contracted with Quest, and Quest sets up an appointment with our participants, and they arrange for a home blood draw or office blood draw, whatever it is the patient wants. We have enrolled, I think I put here greater than 60, it's probably over 70 at this point at Pitt. We are convinced that these people would not have participated in the trial had we required them to come into the University of Pittsburgh to enroll. Too far, too much hassle, what have you. Now they can get it done at home, and they have a remote consent, and boom, they're in the trial. This is essentially a budget-neutral proposition from a site perspective. The way the protocol is written, the sites get $150 to enroll to get the blood specimen. Well, it costs about $90 at our site to get the remote blood draw. You have some costs of sending the tubes to the patient and various things like that. So it comes out to be pretty much a budget-neutral item, but you've gotten an extra enrollee. So you've made your revenue from enrolling a patient. So again, it's a no-brainer. One of our new initiatives is trying to maybe do the contracting through the NRG central facility, in which case not every site would have to arrange a contract with a provider that does national blood draw. Incidentally, there are several companies out there that draw all over the country. And this is pretty routine in many pharma studies. And so this is something we're just adapting from clinical trials apparatus in other contexts. What about, one issue is electronic identification of eligible participants. The findings of 1 or 2 non-advanced adenomas are very common. That's what's driving this trial. This is something that's seen in 30% of people. However, colonoscopy exams are even more common, and many colonoscopy exams are done for prior history of adenoma, and those people would not be eligible for the FORTE trial. So how do you separate the wheat from the chaff and get, the nugget of person that you want to approach? Well, that's a difficult problem. It's certainly one we spend a lot of time on. Many sites have kind of homegrown tools that are meant to identify adenoma detection rates, and those can be adapted for FORTE purposes. Within EPIC, there are reminder systems. There are endoscopy report generators that can be queried, such as Provation, which is the #1 report generator for colonoscopy in the country. However, then you have this pathology linking, and it's not linked to pathology. So these are challenging things. We set up from the very beginning in this trial an NLP provider who could take reports, crunch them for you, and give it back to you and say, here are the people that are likely to be eligible for FORTE. Again, to funnel that down to a more manageable number for the sites. One of the problems here is we want the recruiters or the coordinators at sites to be talking to participants and getting them enrolled in the trial. But if they have to sort through thousands of colonoscopy reports, that's painstaking effort that takes them away from direct recruiting responsibilities. So PIECES was something that we set up. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of barriers because, in the medical care system, no one wants to release a record to anything that's outside their own system. Even if you de-identify it, there's just layers of bureaucracy and complexity to get through. So this is something we've been addressing as a trial leadership. We've met with EPIC and talked with them about maybe some opportunities. Could we develop some tools that maybe we could spread out trial-wide to facilitate this task? What are the sites that are succeeding from an enrollment perspective? Well, the best sites have a team of coordinators that are devoting to this trial, and they are succeeding wildly, and they are doing this in a cost-effective way. The reimbursement for the trial is sufficient to fund your coordinators to do this study, which incidentally, and again, I'm not an expert on cancer treatment trials, but I understand that many of them are money losers, that really the protocol is asking people to do more than they're really being paid for to do. That is not the case in FORTE. Clearly, one has to establish relationships with GI or endoscopic providers. I put this picture up last year. I'm putting up it again. I don't know if anyone remember who it is. It's Willie Sutton. Willie Sutton was a bank robber. They asked him, Willie, why do you rob banks? And he had a very simple answer. Because that's where the money is. Okay? This is where why you have to have GI relationships or endoscopic partners. That's where the money, that's where the polyps are. And this is obviously paradigm breaking for a cancer center, because you guys aren't normally dealing with patients with non-neoplastic disease precursors. Most sites are using letters, but right here, phone calls. That's really what you have to do to get people to tell them about the trial and see if they're interested to participate. FORTE is unusual in that there are a lot of eligible people, but what are the percent that you approach that actually enroll? It's probably only 1 in 10 or something like that. So you have to reach out to a lot of people to get people to be willing to participate. Many people do like to participate in trials. What we need to do is reduce the inconvenience and enhance the good feeling of contributing to the larger whole, which is answering this medical question that's really important. How often do I need to come back for a colonoscopy? And this affects tens of millions of people in this country and worldwide. There's no question that FORTE has the potential to be a landmark, practice-changing study. And that's really a tremendous incentive to investigators out there to be a part of this, because they know they really will be making a difference in the long term. We have asked the NCI to kind of shuffle around some money to help us with some new initiatives. One is what we call the Super Site Initiative. Kaiser, which is our #1 recruiting site, we gave them a bunch of money in advance, startup, to get their systems in place and rolling. That has turned out to be a fabulous investment because they are recruiting on the tune of 30 to 40 patients a month. We don't have another site that's working at that high level, but what we are doing is taking some funds and opening it up and saying, hey, if you want to agree or at least make a commitment to recruit, let's say 25 patients a month, we can give you some funds to get your systems in place and get you started. And we've approached some sites, some that are currently participating sites, others that are not currently participating, and see if they're potentially interested in that. Now, we don't yet have the approval from Brandy and the NCI, but we're expecting that soon, and we've started to float this idea. The other area that we wanted to put some money is into IT, because I told you this ability to identify potential eligible subjects would greatly facilitate the efforts of FORTE coordinators, because now we're just going to people who are highly likely to be eligible. But we never had any money in the budget to fund your IT people. And we think that in order to get IT people to play, we need to give them some compensation. For example, in that Pieces initiative I talked about, which is still out there, we have it, maybe if we provided some money to the ID department, they would be more motivated to help us de-identify reports and potentially send them out to Pieces, and then Pieces could send them back. The other thing that, as I said, is we want to spread remote consent and blood draw across the trial. We see that it has the potential to enroll people who otherwise would not participate, and that's what we need. We have to get our numbers up. So again, that NRG central contracting, and maybe sites that are not currently doing that might consider to do so. So with that, I will close and bring on Jeff Duker, the Assistant Protocol Chair and my good buddy.
Thanks, Rocky. I apologize and pull up the slides here.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, please. Well,
We have a VA in Oklahoma City, and the investigators that I've contacted to try to get them to go to the study are concerned that they have autopiloted colonoscopy recalls, and that they have 7.5-year autopilot that's been in the works forever, and it's really running great, and we don't want to change that, which interferes with the ability to recruit, because all these patients are getting these emails and autopilot recalls. If there's a VA consortium or something that you can work with to try to get the IT infrastructure in the VA fixed so we can do clinical trials without overcoming the big burden of administrative tasks, I think it would work.
Right. As I said, this VA initiative is one of our, real attempts to broaden the trial, increase recruitment. We have currently 5 VAs that have enrolled people. We have several more on the way. It is our intention to do meetings in a VA context and have, just like today, we're going to have a coordinator meeting and sites are going to talk to each other about what practices work. We want to do the same thing on the VA level and get VAs that are working and talking to each other and see if we can share practices and maximize that opportunity.
yeah, thank you. And I mean, that's kind of the point of my talk. I would love to be in that room and talk to them and say, this is why we're doing FORTE. Like, I know you have a system, but this is an important question. It needs answering. So that's really why I'm here, is to discuss partnering with gastroenterologists. Rocky and I are real gastroenterologists. He was on inpatient service last week. I took over. We have street cred. And we can talk to the gastroenterologist at your site about this trial. So, Rocky went over this, because that's where the money is. GI partnership is needed to find potential participants. We think that there might be about 15 million screening colonoscopies per year, and as Rocky mentioned, about 30% have non-advanced adenomas at baseline. So this would be a huge potential number of patients that are eligible. However, of course, that's just the first step. They're out there, you have to find them. So Rocky went over a lot of this, but really the best practices is really the key. We know that 25% of colonoscopy is surveillance, meaning there's a history of polyps. So if you're looking through colonoscopy reports, if there's any way you can just identify the surveillance exams and take them off the table as ineligible, that's going to, you're going to not waste a lot of time going through ineligible patients. And then, of course, a lot of criteria can be assessed right from the colonoscopy report or potentially the patient's chart before you even call the patient. And how gastroenterology can help you is all of our reporting softwares, how we just document colonoscopies, pathology is different in every place. So if they can tell you, this is where we put that information in our report. I've seen some practices write a letter to patients that says, you had this many polyps, here's where the pathology, you should come back in this amount of time. That would be if that exists at your practice, that could be a great place to look to find these patients. Some gastroenterology teams have recall lists. They're very interested in bringing the patients with polyps back in the appropriate time period. So if they have that list and you know when their low-risk patients are supposed to come back and when, you can go right to them and use that list to potentially recruit for FORTE. So you have to know what kind of practice environment you're in. If you're in an academic center, there are probably people that are interested in being a GI investigator, and if you don't know who that is, the chief or the chair of the division can probably help you. In private practice, it can be a little bit more challenging. There maybe is not as much incentive from a gastroenterologist to want to participate in research, but there are large groups that see a ton of patients, and whether you know those contacts or want to even reach out to us about who's available in your area, we've done that recently. Just kind of looked at practices, and our program has actually trained quite a bit of people, and you'd be surprised how many people are sort of out there in the world that we know or kind of second degree know. So how do you appeal to these GI practices? Again, I think it depends on your environment, but of course, if they're an academic practice, you can really push them on the research interest side, and they may have their own GI research staff doing GI-related projects. I know we do pharma trials and other people that are hired through that mechanism, and this might be another source of income if you want to use their research staff in addition to your research staff. It can go either way. And in private practice, there are some private practices. My friend works at one. They have great interest in clinical trials, separately. And they might also have their internal research staff, and they could be interested in some sort of incentive themselves to actually screen patients for enrollment. So I would consider all these things. So what are the selling points? And this is where I hear these things secondhand, and there are times where I wish I was in the room to kind of sell this to a gastroenterologist. I mean, we hear things from both sides. We hear we don't want to wait 10 years. We hear 5 years is too soon. We hear it both ways. And what we stress to people, including in our own practice, we really, really do not know when to bring these people back. That is the whole point of this trial. We're figuring out, it's a range. The guidelines are a range. This will help us actually know. And I think people are interested in that. They're interested in answering that question. And of course, if they're worried about doing less colonoscopy in their 10-year arms, there are some financially motivated gastroenterology practice, I can admit it. And I think you have to convince them that really only a small percentage of patients will be enrolled. So you're not missing out on the sooner colonoscopy for a vast majority of your patients. And then if you're worried about insurance coverage, of course, these colonoscopies are not covered in the trial, but they are standard of care. And even though the guidelines today say 7 to 10 years, there are still a lot of patients getting 5-year interval colonoscopies in practice. There was actually a paper published 2 years ago showing that adherence to the new guidelines is low, and the 5-year arm is still standard of care realistically in the community, and insurance is paying for this. So, to me, it's a balance, right? And you really have to sell your referring endoscopists that these patients are low risk for cancer purely by the trial themselves. And if they're randomized to either arm, either arm is standard of care within the practice of surveillance colonoscopy. So we're not randomizing people to, too early or too late. The intervals are within guidelines. And checking with a gastroenterologist about an individual's patient eligibility is actually not routine. So what we mean by this is if you can sell the trial as such, like we've done to our practice, as these are low-risk patients, we're contacting them on your behalf. Of course, if they have a question, if the coordinator has a question, they can reach out, but most of the time, these patients are able just to enter the trial. Our partners have said, if they're eligible and they agree, consent them. You don't have to call me and say, do you remember Miss Jones, you did a colonoscopy 4 years ago, are they okay to be in the trial? And that's because the nature of the study is that they know these patients are low risk by definition. And that's what I just said. So I think that really helps streamline things. And then, will there be interest? Of course. Well, patients are signing up. We see that there's already 1,200 people plus that are in. So I really think the key is having NRG sites and GI sites partner to have success in the trial. And again, let Rocky and I be that bridge to your practices in GI practices if you need that. We're happy to talk to anybody. Thank you. Oh, yes. We're going to bring up our colleagues from Kaiser. So please come on up.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jasmine. I'm a research associate from Kaiser Permanente, and should I be speaking in the mic? And I'll be sharing with you an overview of the screening, enrollment, and data collection practices that we employ for the FORTE study at KPNC. So during our presentation today, I'll highlight some background information on Kaiser. We'll meet the KPNC FORTE team, followed by a review of the programs that we use. I'll then provide an overview of our screening procedures, recruitment protocol, consenting procedures, and then finally I will share some acknowledgements. Okay, let's begin with a bit of background information on Kaiser. This will help us paint a picture on how and why we screen, recruit, and consent the way that we do. So, sorry. Is that showing? Oh no. Something got messed up. Sorry about that. Well, KP was founded back in 1945, and it's headquartered in Oakland, California, which is where our site is located. KP National has a really wide wingspan. It's reaching patients throughout California, Colorado, Georgia, Hawaii, the Mid-Atlantic states, and the Pacific Northwest. So KP as a whole has around 12.7 million members and a total of 39 hospitals and 623 medical offices. Of those 12.7 million members, 4.6 million members belong to KP Northern California alone. And these members receive care at our 21 hospitals and 210 medical centers. And then we have around 160 gastroenterologists practicing in our region. So as you can see, we're operating within a really big geographical territory, and this can bring both advantages and challenges when offering a clinical trial. Okay, so next we'll dive into the KPNC FORTE team structure. Because in order to understand how we operate, I think it's important to see how we're staffed. So to begin, we have Dr. Doug Corley, who is the Chief Scientific Officer for the FORTE study, for the FORTE National Study, and he's our site's principal investigator. And as PI, Doug supervises the FORTE study at KPNC. He sits at the table with us to brainstorm ideas on everything from workflow development, how to respond to challenging recruitment calls. He also provides the background to some of the clinical questions that come up surrounding gastroenterology. And next we have Laura Amsden. She skillfully leads our study at KPNC as our project manager. And as PM, Laura dedicates about 15% of her time each week to the FORTE study. Within that time, she meets with Doug to discuss study progress, address participant questions, and to just generally brainstorm ideas regarding workflows. She also meets with the research associates on a weekly basis to provide us updates on project goals, provide updates on IRB submissions, and just generally explore our ideas on everything from screening to sample collection. She's awesome. She will enthusiastically jump in wherever she's needed. For research associates, we have 6 at varying FTEs. We have 2 RAs at 40%, 1 at 70%, 1 at 90%, and then 2 more at 100%. 4 out of 6 of us focus on recruitment, which of course includes screening subjects, making recruitment calls, and then conducting consent conferences. We also assign individual study tasks to each RA. One of our non-recruiting RA focuses on mailings in the office. This is everything from recruitment postcards, biospecimen kits, and retention mailings like birthday cards. She also handles some of the participant enrollment, data entry, and some reminder calls. Our other non-recruiting RA, she focuses much of her time on managing our FORTE study access tracking database. She also does a lot of programming on our REDCap platform to meet the needs of the study. She also works on developing and collaborating on new workflows, and she assists with new hire training. Next, we have one research nurse at 20%, who's also here with us today, the wonderful Carolyn. She is responsible for updating the participants' medical record to reflect their participation in the trial. And this documentation is really key for their clinical care team's awareness about the study and any changes that are made to the participants' colonoscopy schedule. She also assists us with some of our RAVE data entry. We have a programmer dedicated to the FORTE study, and she allocates about 15% of her time, and she's done an amazing job building our tracking database. And finally, we have our regulatory team who we consult as needed. And so I would say that we've had the study open at KPNC for about 2 years now, and we think that having a dedicated team has been the driving factor in any success that we've had. Okay, now we'll review the tracking systems that we've built and rely on so greatly for tracking all things FORTE. And the first system that we have is called the Access Tracking Database, and this system allows us to do many, many things. It is where we review colonoscopy and pathology reports. We document all contacts with the participant. We track our recruitment efforts, the shipping of biospecimen kits, the status of vision tree questionnaires, and we track retention mailings. And it's important to note here that the Access Tracking Database is a work in progress. We've continued to develop it to meet our needs as the study has progressed. And also tracks overall study progress. The other major program that we use at KPNC is REDCap. So REDCap serves as our online consent platform. It houses our Participant Bill of Rights, ICF, and HIPAA forms. It allows our participants to review those consent forms and provide their signatures. It collects participant contact information. It houses our KP consent checklist, which is an internal document. And then now it houses our blood draw supplement. REDCap was built to include all of the features that we were instructed we needed, which includes an e-signature function that is certified by KPNC and is compliant with 21 CFR Part 11 requirements. Okay, so let's move into our screening procedures now. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know why this is not working. Before we were able to begin recruitment, we needed a way to identify patients who may be eligible for the FORTE trial. And so that's why screening at a large site like KPNC begins with programming. And following FORTE's eligibility and ineligibility criteria, we worked with programmers to create an algorithm in our electronic medical record system, or EMR. And the algorithm includes a mix of natural language processing, or NLP, and non-NLP. And the EMR system that we use is Epic-based Health Connect. So the algorithm evaluates millions of patients in the EMR system, and it narrows them down to a smaller group of potentially eligible patients. And once these patients have been initially screened by the algorithm, their colonoscopy and pathology reports are manually reviewed to ensure that they meet eligibility criteria without meeting any ineligibility criteria. And we call this manual review cohort ascertainment. This is something we all dedicate a small chunk of time to every week to ensure that we have enough eligible patients to recruit. We chose to review each of these reports by hand because we found that in our electronic records, the algorithms are not always successful at being able to determine the exact size of the polyps or the number of adenomas, so a manual review serves as a double check for us. Further screening occurs with the site recruiter asking the subject screening questions over the phone. We ask these questions to fill any holes that our algorithm and manual review may have left. This helps to ensure that we catch any family history of colorectal cancer, any personal history of cancer, and any additional colonoscopy history. And our PI concludes the screening process after the subject has been consented with one final EMR review prior to enrollment. Now let's take a look at our screening questions. So we have up to 10 screening questions that we ask our interested subjects. These questions are again asked to ensure that subjects continue to only meet the inclusion criteria without meeting any of the exclusion criteria. The responses that we capture here may be new information that our electronic algorithm and manual review did not catch. So if they answer don't know to any of these questions, we just mark them as eligible, and then eligibility is further reviewed. Okay, next we'll go over the recruitment procedures that we follow. So each week we pull a new group of eligible subjects to begin recruitment. We start out by sending out a postcard to everybody in that wave. That postcard is meant to kind of prime the subject for further contact. We then send out a recruitment email to each subject in that wave the following Monday. Phone call 1 begins the same week as the recruitment email, and then phone call 2 is completed the following week. After call 2, we cease all contact attempts. We did initially try out 3 call attempts, but we found that this really didn't appear to increase the likelihood of making contact with the subject. Week 1 calls tend to be more fruitful, and so we find that reaching out to a new cohort every week is a good way for us to maximize our recruitment efforts. A main takeaway point here is that each week we're working with 2 large groups of eligible subjects, the prior week's group and then the group that launched the current week. Okay, so after a subject indicates that they're interested, we begin our consenting procedures. So if an RA has an interested subject on the phone, there are generally 2 ways that the call can go. The subject either has the time to review the consent forms on the spot, or in the more common scenario, they do not have the time to review the forms on the spot and they want to schedule a date and a time to go over them. So in that case, what we'll do is we'll just block out the date and the time on our calendars, send the subject an appointment confirmation email with the consent forms attached, and then when the call begins, we start by sending the subject an email from our access tracking database, and that email contains a unique link to REDCap. And as a refresher, REDCap is the platform where we conduct our consent conferences. And then we review the consent forms with the subject, answer any questions that they have, confirm that they want to join the study, and then an interested subject will electronically sign the ICF and HIPAA forms. After signing, they fill out a contact information page that we've built into REDCap. We then countersign the ICFs, send the subject a PDF copy via email, and then complete a consent checklist, which our PI later reviews and signs, giving us the green light to begin the enrollment process. Of course, after reviewing the forms, or at any time prior to or during the consent call, a subject may decide that they're no longer interested in participating, at which point we thank them for their time and their consideration, and we opt them out. Okay, before I wrap things up, I would just like to share a quick overview of our current response rates at KPNC. Like Rocky mentioned, these numbers are a little bit outdated now, so we have now recruited and enrolled over 700 participants into the study. We have had over 1,700 actively decline. Over 3,700 are considered non-responders. In other words, we never make contact with them via phone or email. Over 350 subjects have been found to be ineligible, And this is frequently due to us finding a significant colorectal cancer diagnosis in their family or recent personal cancer history. And in total, we've reached out to over 7,000 patients throughout Northern California. And the final thing I'd like to share are my acknowledgements. All of this is possible to all of the dedicated teams and individuals that you see here. And thank you so much for your time.
It's really a fantastic system. Thank you so much. Question about text messages as a possible way to get a hold of patients. I don't know about anybody else in this room, but I tend to not answer my phone, my personal phone. I do answer my work phone. But you let it go to voicemail, whether they're listening to that voicemail. So within the Kaiser EHR, do patients consent at all for text message? And could you possibly use a text message system to get people's attention so that you could get in touch with them?
We wish that we could. We currently cannot. We're not allowed to recruit via text.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is something that we think would really be beneficial. I think a lot of us agree that, it's much easier to just see a text on your phone and decide. But unfortunately, we haven't gotten permission to do that. So we are working to see if we can do some communication after they've been recruited via text.
Okay.
But as far as actually recruiting via text and sending a recruitment text message, we can't.
Is that a Kaiser issue?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a Kaiser rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Hopefully
much.
they'll change it, but not yet.
There's an eligibility, hi, Christina
Hi.
Gardner from Cancer Research for the Ozarks. There's a eligibility or ineligibility criteria about having to have a 10-year lifespan. How do you verify that, and how are you documenting that?
Oh, I don't,
It's physician's judgment. Your treating physician would determine if the patient has a 10-year life expectancy based on any other comorbidities they might have. They document that life expectancy in the research chart.
Right, I understand that, but they don't have the, our challenge with this is it's not the GI doc or the endoscopist that's we're communicating with. So just like, when you mentioned that your partners have said it's okay if they qualify, you can have them. So then we're not communicating back with a doctor who's ever seen that patient, and we're having some sites that's a real stumbling block for us.
If there's somebody overseeing that patient on the study.
Right. But in this case, it's a general PI that has no connection to the patient. So
Yeah.
that's my question. Who's making that decision?
If I could just speak to that. Let's say in our site, I'm not the GI doctor for those patients.
Right.
But yes, through EMR review, we can identify, are there any issues that might preclude them? Now, you can imagine, it's impossible to calculate a personalized 10-year life expectancy for every person based on what condition they have. So it's kind of it's a little bit of a blessing. But very frequently, in fact, we were laughing about this earlier today, I get messages from the team saying, we've raised an issue. Does this person have a 10-year life expectancy? And I'll look at the record and make a judgment in that regard. So it is a PI or medical, whoever's involved in your site, can make that decision. It does not have to be made by the gastroenterologist.
Right. And then documenting that. Do you have a process, like at Kaiser, you said you've got your PI is the one that's approving your eligibility. How are you collecting documentation for that criteria?
So we have an internal document called a KP consent checklist, and so every time we consent a patient, we just go ahead and fill that out, and we send that over to our PI, and he will go into their EMR, take one final look at everything to make sure we haven't overlooked any comorbidities or just anything that would make them ineligible. He signs off on that, and then that's when we enroll.
And then your expectation is for audit, that would be your source document to verify that criteria?
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Just one more quick thing. Recall that the patients entering the trial are getting a screening colonoscopy, and one of the criteria for screening colonoscopy should be that you have a 10-year life expectancy. So the baseline patient population that's getting the baseline scope should be, now things happen and people could get new diagnoses, but this tends to be they're getting a preventative study in the first place in order to get into the trial. So just to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, thank you. We'll try to share that. I think the concern is kind of that source documentation piece.
Sure.
Who's going to put their John Henry on the line to say that I've reviewed the chart and I verified that, and when the auditors come, that there's some documentation that says that criteria was verified.
And I won't, just 1 second. The coordinators who are recruiting this patient, they're identifying that if there's any EMR conditions that are identified that are of concern, that may reflect on that 10-year life expectancy, that's when it gets passed up to a medical investigator.
Thanks.
Thank you for your information. It was really insightful. I have a couple questions. I hope now is a good time for questions. So I'm Michelle Lacey. I'm from the Metro Minnesota MCORC. So Jody here, and we're, I think, the third highest enrolling site. And yay. I'm kind of trying to look at how we can kind of expand to another site or two, okay? And if I was looking at your data, and I'm just, so you have about 4.87 FTEs, it looks like, with all your combination to enroll about 30 to 40 patients a month. Is that kind of, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea what your, and maybe you don't have this data, but I was curious, within your organization or with your scope of patients that you're drawing from, how many colonoscopies per year are you kind of grabbing from? Does that make sense? Do you have any idea? Like 10,000, 5,000?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know,
It's a lot.
50,000, okay. I mean, I was just trying to get an idea, because then we would put that data together to try to determine what our yield is. Because I'm kind of thinking, I want to be one of these super sites. So I'm trying to put my data together for that. My third question is, and I've asked this at a different meeting, but I kind of have this real curiosity about this NINT, a registration category for kind of interventional trials, and I've been told that that could potentially happen with FORTE in a future amendment. I don't know if you know it, but my question is, how long is that going to take?
Well, I think that's something that would be good to discuss at the coordinator meeting. So
Okay,
I think let's
great.
take that out of that, and we'll
Okay.
talk about that later.
Then lastly, my question is for all of you is, goes along the lines with the text messaging. Have you considered, or do you use MyChart as a means for recruitment? It currently is not allowed within our organization, but there's talk about it, right? Because mail is expensive, people don't answer their phones. How can we really, kind of try to reach these patients who want to participate in research? And so we're trying to make a case for doing that.
I think that sounds like our KP, MyKP system, and yeah, we can't use that either. Caroline, do you have something to add?
MyChart is being used at sites that are enrolling in FORTE, so it's out there and it's being done.
It's also not allowed to use.
Yeah.
Not allowed to use MyChart to do any research on
Yes, so I mean, it may be institution-specific and you have an alternative means, but the concept is certainly out there.
Very nice presentation. So can you tell me, do you know the percentage of minority or underserved patients that actually enroll? And how do you encourage that at the Kaiser site?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't have the numbers. I don't know if we're doing really, I mean, we do ask, demographic data, so I'm sure we could get a sense of like our, how many underserved populations?
I can speak to that.
Yeah, please do.
Of course, we have for the trial, and on a monthly basis, we review that with the SDMC, and I'm sure you've seen those. One of the things that we've talked about, and because Doug is a friend of mine and we're in communication, there is an opportunity that one could enhance recruitment in minorities by directing more pulling up of the initial colonoscopies from a minority population and trying to go with that route. And that's something that we've talked about. We think that it would be a little bit more time-consuming. It's a little bit of a harder sell, and the barriers that we all recognize. And so that's something where we've said, hey, maybe we should provide more reimbursement if we're going to focus on a minority population. It's actually something that we had in this last set of initiatives, and we decided to leave it out, and we focused on the 3 that we've got so far. So it certainly is a possibility. Jeff has played a big role in trying to spearhead are getting a more representative and expanded minority population.
Yeah, I just pulled up the numbers. We are kind of cooking right at our expected enrollment, but yes, we have these initiatives in mind to specifically recruit underserved persons.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
So I have two comments. One's a question. I'd like to see a show of hands if anybody is using text messaging with FORTE. I'm just totally curious because I never thought of that. So I thought, I like that idea. And I'm from NRG operations. So I'm just curious, is anybody using text messaging? No. Yeah, I think that's a great idea for the exact reasons you said.
Recruiting, we're using it for when they, communication when they park the car, how to get to us after we sign consent.
So here's my thought. Could you use it, and I'm going to defer to you a little bit on this. Could you use it as FORTE awareness? So to get the word out about FORTE somehow. Because, part of with research and clinical trials is you have to kind of introduce the idea a little bit before the patients are going to start. I'm putting you on the spot.
I like to be put on the spot, it's fine. So I think the reason I asked the question is because Kaiser has a really sophisticated system. And so often in a system, they consent patients to participate in modes of communication within the system. So if the participant had consented to text messaging, could you provide that type of kind of general information about studies, including FORTE, through a text messaging system that relates, generally to things they might be interested in? That was where the idea of the question was coming from.
Start thinking about if you do it at your site. The other item, and this came up on another trial that I work on. Sorry, I do work on other studies. With my chart, I was talking to a physician about a different trial, and what she said is before the patient even comes in to see her in clinic, a week or two beforehand, she sends the patient information on the study so that the patient is aware of it. So is there a way we could somehow do something with my chart to send information to patients who are potentially, coming in for a follow-up GI appointment, a PCP appointment, some sort of appointment where we could just put it out there? Anybody trying anything like that? You are.
Well, we send the letter, the recruitment letter, and we have it with GI, and they send it with like the patient's colonoscopy packet too.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So that's what we've kind of done.
Have you had success with that?
We've had a few people call, but then sometimes they're not eligible, they end up not having a call up, or they're still interested, or want to know more. So we kind of still do that with some success, but not a lot.
Excuse me, if you guys are going to respond to a question, please come to the mic. We are recording this, so we've just missed a lot of great conversation that we would like to make aware of for people.
Hi, I'm Emily. I work at Essentia Health in Duluth, Minnesota. I was saying that we send out the FORTE recruitment letter with the GI endoscopy reports, or even before they have their colonoscopy. So they are slightly aware of the study if they read through every paper in that packet, with some success, but not a whole lot. But at least they see the info and it's on their mind if they are interested in
it
research.
gives them a little awareness. That's because part of it is just getting the awareness of the trial.
Yes.
Judy.
So as the regulator in the room, I would just remind everybody, any ideas that you have, make sure, recruitment related, of course, screening recruitment, make sure that's approved by the CIRB. And actually with these newer ideas, I would encourage you to just put it out there. I've actually been surprised quite a bit over the last couple of years as terms of what I've seen the CIRB approve. So throw it out there. Throw out the ideas of text messaging, and that, of course, you have to follow your local policies and procedures, institutional guidelines, but throw the ideas out there. You might be surprised.
And just to respond, we haven't done it for FORTE specifically, but we have used MyChart for other studies. For us, it has to be patients that have opted in to receiving, to being interested in research. But once they opt in, then we can use MyChart to push information out about a trial. If you're interested, contact. We don't get a lot of response from it, but we get a little bit of, response to somebody we can follow up with.
But it also doesn't cost.
Right.
So, little response for something that doesn't cost you any money.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, so much for your questions and all of your comments. We definitely encourage you to continue having these discussions as we continue with the FORTE trial. I guess we can definitely do more Q&A at the end as well, but I will go ahead and introduce myself. I am Cheryl Liao. I am the FORTE Education and Communications Specialist, and I'm based out of NRG Oncology Operations in Pittsburgh. I hope you all are having a wonderful time here in Orlando at NRG 2024. So if you are on social media, I highly encourage you to be using the hashtag NRG 2024 to share your insights from this workshop and all the sessions that we have going on here today. Today, I want to talk about promoting FORTE across your clinical research network. It's actually very encouraging to hear all the insights that you guys have been sharing so far, because a lot of the topics that we've discussed are things that we think about a lot from NRG operations. And one of the things I want to talk about today is the idea of branding. Now, this may be a little bit unfamiliar to the clinical research world, but I don't think that it is a highly unusual topic to talk about when it comes to creating awareness about a clinical trial. So of course, I started with a very familiar image to anyone. Of course, the logo is blocked out, but I'm sure the moment you saw it, you knew exactly what that was. And why is that? And what is the purpose of branding? Well, branding is designed to build an audience, to build trust with that audience, and to tell a story about what you are trying to accomplish, whether it is to get someone to purchase something, or in our case, to encourage people to participate in clinical trials that are important to encourage colonoscopy awareness. We really want to use the idea of branding to create recognizable contacts for people to become familiar with things before they are ever approached about enrolling in a clinical trial. So of course, we want to talk about things that go into a brand, into the promotion idea of a clinical trial. What goes into a brand? We have things like logos, names, taglines, colors, a mission, and of course, graphics. Many of these things you will see regularly before you ever interact with a brand, and you will need to see them. I know that there's been research to back this up, sometimes dozens or hundreds of times before you may think of interacting with anything that has a branding around it. And the purpose of a brand is to communicate something important to your audience about who you are and what you want to do. So in the case of FORTE, the FORTE brand has, of course, our logo, we have our colors, we have our CRB-approved mascot, so that is available for you to use to promote FORTE anywhere you want. It has been named FUBU by Dr. Schoen, so go ahead and promote the FORTE trial using the mascot. We also have many CRB-approved texts and materials that contains many FAQs and a lot of information that you can use to promote FORTE and make sure that people are made aware of this trial as we want to get to that 9,500 patient number. The whole purpose of the FORTE brand is to help patients see how important FORTE is and want to get involved before you ever call them and talk to them about getting enrolled in the trial. How can you use the FORTE brand at your site? As we've mentioned before already, we have lots of patient-directed materials developed, from flyers, letters, postcards. If you come up with anything else, let us know. Email us at forte@nrgoncology.org. We will happily create any materials you want. But we also highly encourage you to take these materials and to create a site-specific version of them. For example, on the one-page flyer that we have up here, there is a little section at the bottom right that says, "To get involved at FORTE," and there's a blank spot. Grab a sticker, put your contact information on there, and make sure that patients know how to reach out to you to get involved with FORTE. We encourage you to make all of these materials site-specific. Depending on your local IRB, you may even reach out to patients and get patient stories about why they're involved in FORTE, why is screening colonoscopies, and why is colorectal cancer important to them. We encourage you to reach out not only to the patients that may be eligible in this particular format, but also their loved ones, their family, their colleagues, and more, because the more conversation that we can develop around this clinical trial, the more patients are going to be made aware of it, and the more enrollments will happen. Where can you use the FORTE brand? The FORTE brand is very recognizable, so we encourage you to use it in a variety of places. The first thing, of course, patient-facing distributions. To give credit to our regulatory team, they have done a great job to help us get a lot of material CIRB approved, so you may be able to put lots of information into newsletters, mailings, emails, reminders, follow-ups, clinics, and waiting rooms. Whether you're doing it electronically or printing them out, having that information available helps people have a recognizability with the FORTE brand before you ever ask them a question hey, do you want to participate? We have also started discussing, of course, the possibility of putting it in the EHR or any mobile applications, because patients do interact with those to get prescriptions filled, to be reminded of their follow-up appointments, any comments that their physicians may have made. We all know that the EHR is incredibly important to your clinical care, so we encourage you, if at all possible by your local IRB, see if you can just pop a logo in there and make a comment about getting involved with FORTE. We have a lot of material in that sense to be able to be distributed. We also have videos and press releases and podcasts. Many medical centers are now getting involved with video production and audio production, so we encourage you, if your medical center, I know UPMC, for example, has a podcast network being built up. If there's any information out there of how to reach patients in a more organic way, we encourage you to use your CIRB-approved material to connect with patients and just talk about colorectal cancer awareness and in these podcasts and these video productions. And of course, we cannot forget your clinical research network. Many people who work in clinical research know it is hard to talk about clinical research to people who are not in clinical research. So we highly encourage you to rely on your network to talk about these clinical trials. Talk to physicians, gastroenterologists, nurses, research staff, clinic staff, and talk to them about FORTE, so everybody has at least seen the brand, has seen that logo, a colorectal cancer prevention trial, and knows exactly what you're talking about when you mention FORTE. So one of the last things I want to mention is next month is Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month. It is March 1st. We will be starting to distribute materials on our social media platforms about Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, and just this week, we had the CIRB approval go through for a new list of Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month social media stuff, so keep an eye out on your CTSU pages. Those should be distributed on March 1st. We highly encourage you who use social media regularly to post about these topics. Use the hashtags colorectal cancer, colon cancer, colorectal cancer awareness month, and talk about FORTE. I have to credit, for example, Metro Minnesota has a very active social media team, and they are posting about the clinical research. And I don't know if it's causational or correlated, but they do have incredible recruitment. So anything you can do to talk about FORTE can definitely help. And of course, we have our social media platforms. I have not yet updated the logo for X, but we have active social media platforms across all of the current platforms. And we encourage you to interact with these and talk about FORTE with your network, and make sure that people are aware before they ever get contacted to enroll, because the more familiar people can get with the idea of clinical trials and clinical research, the more likely they'll be to enroll in these trials. So we will definitely want to open it back up to Q&A. We want you guys to feel comfortable to talk about the FORTE brand here and outside of this room. So thank you so much.
$50.
U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. So have you considered lowering the age to 45?
It's something we talked about in the initial
I know the event
launching.
rate's going to be lower, blah, blah, blah.
Yes,
But
yes.
it could bring in a new bolus of patients who we don't have to worry if they have a 10-year life expectancy.
That's true. That's true. It's certainly something we can take up with Hannah and the statistical team. I see. Early onset, yes. Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons that we were a little hesitant initially is because now imagine you have a 47-year-old who has one or two non-advanced adenomas. Well, is that person at higher risk because they were young and now they're manifesting adenomas, or are they really just part of the garden variety? Right. Yes. It's something to entertain for sure.
Good afternoon. My name is Edgar. I'm coming from Yale University. I had two questions, but someone took the advantage and just made the question. It was in regard to lowering the age, so I got the answer. The other question, first I have a comment to add in regards to what we're doing there at Yale with my chart. Yale is a research institution, so all the patients, when they're signing up, we encourage them to sign up for my chart. And as soon as they sign up, unless they opt out of the option of research, all the patients, specific criteria that they might meet for any study, they will be receiving a message right away. And so we do that with all our patients, unless they opt out. And within my chart message for the FORTE study is very general, letting them know that they might qualify for the study, and with a brief explanation of the study. We don't go that deep, but it's the tool that we've been using now to start recruiting our patients. And my question is, I know we're telling this patient that we don't know if 5 to 10 years, okay, when, we don't know. But what was the idea behind starting in first place with the screening of 5 years? Because some patients are like, okay, if you don't know, why did you guys start it in first place with 5 years?
Good question.
That we'll have to ask the gods of GI. I can only say that the recommendation of 5 to 10 was established in 2012. So this out to 10-year interval has been there for 12 years. I can tell you that in the 90s, when colonoscopy was developed and you found polyps, we were recommending yearly colonoscopy, okay? So there was a trial, kind of a famous trial, that randomized people to 3 years versus 1 year, something like that, for polyp surveillance. And the 3-year was found to be equivalent to 1 year, and that's why we moved out to 3 years. And that was in the early 90s. So over those next 10 years, it kind of got moved out to 5 to 10, and here we are.
Okay, thanks.
So I'm just going to make the pitch for lowering the age sooner rather than later. And that's because it'll inevitably end up a question in that lower age group if you don't include them in the trial. It'll be, well, what about the people who are 45 to 50?
Right. Of course, we won't have power to answer the question in the 45 to 50-year-old.
Right, but by not including them in the trial, then it's totally unanswered, right?
Oh, here, Hannah's getting ready to.
Just a reminder, the 50 cutoff is at randomization, so theoretically, participants who had their first colonoscopy like at 46 could be eligible, and right now we have the majority of participants are those retroactive accruals. So I think 75% of participants right now beyond from 2 to 4 years from their qualifying colonoscopy. So we are having, in fact, participants
some
that are
lower age range, right?
So the median age, I believe it's 55. So, but we are, and I don't think we have a lot of participants that are right after their qualifying colonoscopy. So I think we hassled with that question, do we have 50 at randomization or 50 at qualifying colonoscopy? And we agreed that just for clean purpose, we'll go 50 at randomization. So it kind of...
So all you'd have to do is lower it to 49, and you'd capture the whole range.
Yeah, I mean, we have a steering committee meeting coming up for the trial, and I think it's a good question to ask our steering committee, because we are getting some observational data from this cohort that has been screened at this age. So I think it's a great idea.
So I think, that it's a great idea, but you need the power, okay? So I think what Rocky said is true. So, if you're just going to get, some data and you can't power it, so that's something that you have to consider, right? So I think the study is powered to answer certain questions for certain ages. If you don't have enough patients, right, in that particular subset, you're not going to be able to answer a question.
No. Yeah. No, we can answer for the range 50 to 70. That's what we can arrange.
And we just found out you're actually answering it from a range of 46.
Yes,
Right?
correct. Yeah, I mean, I think point is well taken, and I think it is, as Jeff said, it's something we should bring to the steering committee, and we should have our statistical people there, and we can debate it and decide, and then we can have Judy submit the documents to change it.
So just a couple questions. So, the social media question and, using that, have you looked at by different age categories? Of course, if you look at some people, right, so young people are very into social media. Are there certain things that you use for different age brackets that show? That was one question. The other thing, with the My Charts now, when you go to certain places, I don't know, you check My Chart and that you allow permission for anybody who uses your My Chart to be able to, have access and go. So then, even private doctor's office that are affiliated with the hospital, can potentially. So, there's this merging of the My Charts now that anybody, right, so everybody can see everything. So I just don't know if that's helpful or not, that you can have a lot more people actually entering into that My Chart as long as the patient gave permission, right? And the social media question, since you brought that up.
Yes, thank you so much for asking that question. I think that is definitely a topic that we often think that social media is incredibly focused on the younger generations. There has been some statistical analysis done by larger social media facing companies, X, bad habit, Meta, and of course different platforms that use it, such as Canva. If any of you are aware of that graphic design platform, I highly recommend it. A lot of that information has shown that it is not exclusively the younger generations. I mean, for example, if any of you guys were watching the Super Bowl with the Temu ads, the highest demographic of consumers who are using Temu are actually above the age of 50. And how are they finding out about this? They are finding it, believe it or not, on social media and on places like TikTok. While creators tend to skew younger, or at least are promoted as younger demographically by the platforms, the people who are consuming the content are not necessarily younger generations. I do believe that there are some statistics out there that show that the Meta platforms tend to be more popular with the older generations, but I don't specifically see any distinctions there in terms of seeing any demographic differences. And generally speaking, I think also the idea of promoting clinical trials on social media is very new. So just getting that information out there in general and connecting with anyone relevant is definitely something we encourage, because it's not just patients that will be using it, providers will also be using it. We have had, last year during the NRG meeting, we had a gastroenterologist reach out about FORTE, I believe, to Dr. Duker because of the posts that were on social media. So, you can make all sorts of connections there, and we highly encourage you guys to use that.
Well, I want to thank everyone for attending. Fabulous session. Really appreciate the other presenters. You can see there's just a lot of intellectual and emotional interest, and that's great. And so I look forward to giving you further positive reports as we go forward.